By far the most common question I get asked on this channel about riding your bike in the wintertime is, what kind of bike should I ride? And so that's what we're tackling today, the perfect winter bike, no matter what your budget is. Hey everybody, I'm Tom and this is Shifter, a channel about urban cycling, bike commuting, and the ways we get around our cities. And if you like this video, please consider subscribing. So scenario one is the no budget winter bike. And this is probably the most popular kind of winter bike because this is what most people use when they just love riding in the summertime and they want to extend their season into the winter. And if this is working for you, great, keep going for it. I think that's amazing. But, and of course there's a but, this can be risky and I'll tell you why. Winter can be really hard on bikes, and take this from me in my experience, if you have a beloved bike and you don't take care of it in wintertime, winter can destroy it. All that snow and salt that gets put on the roads and the slush and the muck, it can get into your components. It can rust them out faster than you would believe. And before you know it, you've taken a beautiful bike and it's no longer rideable. But that doesn't mean it's impossible. So if you really love your summer bike and you have no budget to buy a second bike for winter, here's some advice on how you can make it work. The most important thing is to clean it well and clean it often. You've really got to get that muck and that mud and that salt especially off that bike. So however you can, clean it. Which leads to the next question, which is how do I clean my bike in winter when like all the outside taps are turned off so they don't freeze? Yeah, this is not easy. There's a little tricky ways to do it. So for years, what I would just do is go inside, fill up a bucket with warm water in the kitchen sink, bring it outside and use that to scrub my bike down a little bit. I know other people who take a bike to the car wash occasionally and give it a nice hose down. You can also use those pump sprayers that people use on their lawns. This is good for a nice dusting. I find it doesn't have enough pressure to really get the hardcore muck off there. But all these can certainly work, or just get a wet rag and wipe it down. So you're gonna have to put a little effort into it. And so yeah, it's doable. Make sure you do it. I also know some people who swear by putting wax or a special winter lube on their chains in the wintertime. This can help, repel some of the water and the moisture and the salt and the grit. So I think that's a good idea. Another investment you should make, even if it's a minor one, is a fender. If you get some kind of fender on your bike, it will help keep your pants dry, of course, so that's really important as well. And the last point, I know I said this was the no budget option, but maybe it's just like a minuscule budget option, is like invest in some winter tires if you can. There's a couple of different kinds. You can just get winter tires just like on your car. There are winter bike tires that use different rubber that responds better in the cold, and so it'll give you a bit more traction. But if you can't afford it, I always recommend studded tires. They make a huge difference in the slippery conditions. You can use just one on the front or one on the front and the back. They make a huge difference. They will give you so much stability in the snow and the ice. That's a few things you can do to keep your beloved summertime bike going all winter long on no budget. Keep it clean, keep it well maintained, do a little bit of winterizing on your tires and you should be good to go. Scenario two is the low budget option. Now really this is for those of you who want to save your summer bike. You don't want to risk it in the winter, but you have a little bit of money to spend on a second bike for the winter time. And this is an amazing winter bike, even though it doesn't look like much. The idea here is to find an old bike that's really cheap and give it a few customizations for winter. I borrowed this bike off of a friend of mine, but it's very similar to a bike that I happily rode for years through many Canadian winters. I want to talk about a few things here. The first is the frame. Now, this is a 45-year-old Norco frame. It's very important to get an old one. Why? Because it's cheap, but not only that, it'll hold up. So something from the early 2000s, something from the 90s, 80s, you should be able to find an old mountain bike in your city. I don't know, in my city, these things are everywhere. They're undervalued. I don't think people appreciate how good bikes are from that era. So these frames are really solid and they're super cheap. You can probably pick one up for next to nothing. The second thing to think about is the frame material. Aluminum is great in the wintertime because it will resist rust, but this is a chromoly steel frame. But make sure it's just a nice solid frame. Okay, and maybe the most important part, and this is the conversion you want to make, the little modification, single speed. Now bear with me on this, I know gears are lovely to have, but in the winter, derailleurs suck. The snow and the grit gets in there and they will never shift right. You'll be fighting with them constantly. They require a ton of maintenance and they will drive you crazy. So the goal here is to simplify this bike as much as possible. Get it down to a single speed. Yeah, you're gonna have to push it a bit more because you've only got one speed, but it's winter, you're going slow anyway. You're not setting any land speed records in the wintertime. Make it simple and it will last so it doesn't frustrate you all winter long. It's definitely possible to convert a bike to a single speed yourself. You can see here he's just used his existing front chain ring. He's got a smaller one at the back and he's got a tensioner to keep his chain nice and tight. There are other ways of doing it. talk to your local bike shop. It's definitely possible to do it yourself. And a couple of other final points. Make sure it's got fenders of some kind. John's only got one on the back here. I guess he likes to avoid getting the skunk stripe up his back. I like to have them on the front and the back to keep your legs a bit dry. And brakes, disc brakes are great, but also they're expensive and a little sensitive sometimes in the wintertime. So he's got rim brakes on here. Again, I think what matters here is simplicity. You want cheap, affordable, durable, one that's not going to drive you crazy. This is a great winter bike. And if you have very little money, this is what I think you should go for. Old mountain bike frame, wider 26-inch tires, single speed, fenders, rim brakes. You'll be good to go for years. Scenario 3 is the mid-range winter bike. And this is the time where I talk about the bike that I ride every day in the winter. This is my venerable Priority Continuum Onyx. And I won't spend too much time talking specifically about this bike because I have a whole video about this bike. And there are other brands making similar bikes, but what are important are the components I want to tell you about here, the elements that go into making this the perfect winter bike for me. So the first thing is it's an aluminum frame, so it resists that rust like I talked about earlier. That's super important. I think the most important bit here is the drivetrain. So this does not have a chain, it has a carbon belt. And why that's important, why the carbon belt drive is important to me is because, again, it won't rust. The chain won't get all gummed up with that salt and grit and rust out or require all kinds of maintenance. This belt drive requires almost zero maintenance, which, you know, even though I have a YouTube channel about cycling, I kind of hate doing bike maintenance. So anything that lowers the amount of time I have to spend cleaning or scrubbing or retightening is good to me. So that's why I like this carbon belt drive. If you live in a really cold climate, make sure you get the one built for cold. Just a little word of warning there. Carbon belt drive here is paired with another important element, which is the internal gearing. So internal gears I find much better in the winter than a derailleur because all the gearing is inside. It's protected from the elements, so it's going to run no matter what is going on with the conditions outside. So that is amazing. This is an Involio variable speed drive. So rather than clicking into different gears like most bikes, it kind of like tightens and loosens. So you have like infinite gears. There are good things and bad things about this, this model. When it gets really cold, like we're talking minus 30 degrees Celsius, it does really get slow, and sometimes it's even frozen up on me. So bear that in mind. There are ways around that of doing maintenance, but you know, I'm terrible at maintenance. And you don't have to go with this one. There are lots of internal gear models out there. You know, I've got a other bike with a Shimano Nexus, which I just love. If you want to go with the roll-off hubs, I think that would be a great option. Hey, maybe you want to try one of those new gearboxes everyone's talking about. I think they could all work. The point is that they all have the gears inside that are protected from the snow and the elements. A couple of other little things that I really love on this bike. It's got full fenders, which is really important for me, and it has hub dynamo lights, so the lights that are powered by the movement of the wheel, which means I never have to like think about charging external lights. You may notice I have an external light here because in the really dark days of winter, I don't trust drivers around here, so I do have some extra lights. There's other brands out there that make bikes with some of these elements in them, but these are the elements that make this the perfect winter bike for me. And I just checked before I came out here, this model retails right now for about $1,200 US, which is really reasonable for a good commuter bike. Okay, the fourth scenario, which we'll call the big budget option. Yep, it's fat bike time. So fat bikes are amazing machines for the winter, and if you've never had a chance to ride one in the snow, go for it. They're super fun, and just the way you can crush some of those snowbanks is just so like elemental. It just feels great. Now, I don't own a fat bike, so cue stock footage that's gonna run right now, but what makes it so special is those big fat tires. The extra girth, the low pressure means you can just sort of float a little bit better over the snow, and so it keeps you more upright, more stable. You can just get through more things than skinnier tires can do, which is a great option in the wintertime. The downside is that they're pretty spendy. Now, there's a pretty good aftermarket for fat bikes in most winter places these days, so you should be able to find a used one if this is the route you want to go. But a few things to consider if you are thinking about a fat bike. One is those fat tires do create extra drag, especially if you run them at low pressures. And so you're going to have to like work a little bit extra hard to push that machine through. If you live in a city that gets a lot of snow, you've got to also be aware of that. Fat bikes are great for snow that's up to like maybe 4 inches. Anything deeper than that, if you're getting up to 5-6 inches, there's just no way any bike is going to get through that. So if you're using it as your commuter, make sure your city is maintaining the routes that you've got to use, and they're at least packing the snow down or removing some of it. The ideal conditions for a fat bike are like a couple of inches of groomed snow. And so if you've got that, then a fat bike will just be a dream on your commute. And having said that, I should say too that maybe even more important than the bike that you ride is the city that you live in. If they're offering good, safe bike infrastructure and they're maintaining it in the winter, that's going to do better than any bike could ever do. I just had to throw that in. Okay, one bonus tip. Those are the 4 budget scenarios I laid out, but there is one little sneaky thing in here that I'll throw in, and that is electrification. Any of these options will be made easier in the winter if it's an e-bike, especially, I'll say, a fat bike. One of the things that I found in winter is that it just takes a little bit more effort to get through the snow. I don't know if it's the cold has some impact on your muscles, but it just feels like a little bit more work in the winter time. And with the fat bike, you have that extra rolling resistance to overcome as well. You know the easiest, best way around this? An electric bike. Of course, the cold will reduce the range of the bike, but if you're commuting, get to work, plug it in, should be no problem. So we'll call this the bonus option, is if you can make any of these options an e-bike, it's going to make your winter just a little bit easier. And one final point I'll leave you with is that what's more important than any kind of bike to winter cycling is your attitude. I know winter cycling can be intimidating, but it doesn't have to be. People all over the world are riding their bikes through the winter all the time. You don't have to be a masochist. You don't have to be an athlete. Just get out there and give it a try. Work things out as you go, and I think you'll figure it out. If you're looking for more advice, I've got a whole playlist of videos about winter cycling, and maybe check out my book, Frostbike. There's a link in the description down below. Thanks for watching. Good luck out there, and I'll see you next time.